Well, the springtime is upon us, and one of my absolute favorite baits to use in the spring is a spinnerbait. A spinnerbait will not only catch a lot of fish, but it will catch some of the biggest bass that live in your lakes, your rivers, and your ponds. So in this video, we're gonna talk all about spinnerbait fishing in the springtime. Now, before we get into it, I have a really special announcement for you guys, something that I have been waiting for several months now, and that is Finn Fishing has an all-new product, which is the duck hat. This is a waterproof, high-performing, lightweight hat, and I'm telling you, this thing is it's just a premium hat. If you guys can remember, in the fall, I came out with the duck shorts, which are also water resistant and lightweight. And this hat is exactly the same. You guys have probably noticed me wearing this hat a lot, and I've had a couple of them for probably about 6 months now that I've been really testing out, wearing a lot, because it's what I like to do with all the products that I get, making sure that they are a good product before I more or less bring them to the market. And this thing is awesome. I'm really pumped about it. And right now, because I just got them in, I always do a little bit of an introductory sale, and nothing's different. So for the next week, basically until the end of February, these things are going to be on sale. So they are a premium hat. They are a great hat, very well made. And anyways, I'm going to leave some links down below in the description. If you guys are looking for a new hat to wear this year, I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed with the duck hat. Shopping at Finn Fishing is truly the best way to help support this channel. I greatly appreciate all of you who have done so. All right, let's go ahead and get into spinnerbait fishing. Man, I absolutely love spinnerbait fishing, and I got several of them here. If you guys have been watching the Bassmaster Elite series over the last couple days, specifically today, there's been a lot of spinnerbait fishing happen. Well, more or less a couple anglers that are fishing it, and man, it just gets me going. I love a spinnerbait. And a spinnerbait, like I said, it's a great bait in the pre-spawn. In my opinion, it is one of the best baits in the pre-spawn. It's also one of the best baits to use in the late fall. Now, fishing it in the pre-spawn versus the late fall are a little bit different. And so in this video, we're gonna talk a little bit about more springtime spinnerbait fishing. Now, the first thing, and as you can see, what I think is one of the most important things to do with a spinnerbait in the spring is use a red colored spinnerbait. Now, it doesn't have to be fully red like the one that you see here, although when they're biting this, it seems like they are really big ones. Sometimes it just means a little bit of red incorporated onto the baits. These are both Berkeley baits. Here's a bait that I really like too. This is the Jason Christie Booyah bait, the Covert series. And you can see on this one, the head of it is actually red. So these are some of the brands of spinnerbaits that I use a lot. And if they are incorporating red into your baits, you know how important it is for a lot of anglers. And I'll tell you a story. I've told this before, but a number of years ago, I was fishing a local tournament here in Ohio. And I was fishing with another angler who I consider to be a very good angler. And we were fishing kind of these larger pad fields. We were both throwing spinnerbaits this day. And so we really kind of had equal opportunity. Although he was in the back of my boat, we really had equal opportunity to catch a fish because these fish were kind of anywhere and everywhere. And on that day, I caught like 6 or 7 bass, which is pretty good for Ohio in the springtime, as opposed to his one fish. He caught 1 fish. And the only difference in our spinnerbaits, we were both using a white and chartreuse spinnerbait, same exact blades. The only difference, I had a little red kicker blade, just like this on. And I'm telling you, that was the difference. We ended up doing really well in that tournament. I think we finished like 2nd or 3rd out of 80 some boats in that tournament. And it was all, in my opinion, it was all because of that one little red blade. And we've talked a lot, you guys know that I'm not big on the color game when it comes to spinnerbait, or when it comes to any type of fishing. Like, I really don't believe in a lot of these colors that are out there, but in the pre-spawn, red can be the deal. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the whole spinnerbait. Sometimes just adding a little red kicker blade, having a little bit of red in the skirt, maybe having it on the head. If you don't have a bait that like a spinnerbait that actually has a red blade or a red head, sometimes you can add a red colored trailer to it. So having a little bit of red, I really believe that is a really big deal in the springtime. When I'm spinnerbait fishing in the pre-spawn, it's almost always on my baits these days. And I'm not saying it can't work outside the pre-spawn, you know, in summer and whatnot. I just seen it to be really a big factor during the pre-spawn. So anyways, let's go on to kind of the next tip. And the big thing that you'll see here that is important with a spinnerbait that I think specifically in the pre-spawn is that you want this thing to be hitting cover. You want this thing to be hitting a lot of cover. A lot of times in the spring, I'm going to be focused on either grass, wood, or rock. Now, if I'm fishing in grass, sometimes there are a little bit better baits to use. For example, a chatterbait, a lipless crankbait. Those are baits that come through that grass a little bit better. A spinnerbait can be a good alternative to those baits. And sometimes when you are around a lot of guys who are fishing chatterbaits and who are fishing lipless crankbaits, or maybe they're just fishing all the same bait, you can pick up a spinnerbait and catch you a lot of fish. But I really like to throw this thing on wood, around wood. So a lot of times I'm looking for areas where these fish are gonna be moving up to spawn, and I'm trying to hit the major pieces of wood that kind of lead into these areas. So this may be a big stump on the bank. This may be a laydown on the bank. It may be just some standing timber kind of leading up to this area. These are all really good places to throw a spinnerbait. And a lot of times I am going to be hitting this thing up against the wood. I'm casting it right into the wood cover, hitting it against the wood, and making that bait deflect off that wood. A lot of times that deflection, when that bait kind of kicks, that can really be the deal as far as getting some extra bites. Now, not all the time when you're fishing a spinnerbait are you going to be around a lot of cover. So when I am not around a ton of cover, what I like to do every now and then as I'm reeling that bait in, I'm just gonna pop my rod. I'm reeling that bait, pop the rod. And what that does is this bait's humming along, boo, 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 making a lot of vibrations, and all of a sudden you pop it and it makes that blade kind of flare up and shoot up, and that can be a trigger mechanism for a bass. If a bass is hunting that bait down and you pop it, bam, you will a lot of times get a bite. So if you are not around a lot of cover, maybe you're fishing in a pond where there's not as much grass or wood laydowns or whatever it may be, pop that blade every now and then. I'm telling you, that can be a humongous deal at getting a lot more bites. But if you are around cover, put that thing in the cover, man. Those bass are gonna be tight in that cover. Put it in the cover, whether that's under a dock, on a laydown, whatever it may be. Now, the other big thing, and this is something that I do a lot more in early spring. So as soon as that water temp gets to be about the upper 40s, you know, mid to upper 40s and pretty much until 60 degrees, one of the best things that you can do is slow roll a spinnerbait. This is truly, in my opinion, a big fish pattern. So if you get into some of these areas where fish are funneling into spawn, some of the deepest water outside of those spawning grounds will hold fish before they actually move up to spawn. These are great areas to slow roll a spinnerbait. I'm gonna cast that bait out. I'm basically gonna let that bait get to the bottom, and I wanna slow roll this thing where I know it's pretty much hitting the bottom the whole time. That is, I'm telling you, you're not gonna get a ton of bites that way with a spinnerbait, but the ones that you get are always really, really big ones. Now, something that I should talk to you about too when it comes to all this is that different blade configurations are going to be a little bit better for certain situations. But I don't personally think in this pre-spawn that there's always a perfect rule for blades, because back in the day, I used to think when I was in muddy water is when I wanted the Colorado blades, these more circular blades, because they have a lot of vibration. And they are good in that water, but I've also caught them on Colorado blades in really clear water before. Same thing to be said about willow blades. I used to think, man, if I'm in clear water, I use the willow blades. In the springtime, I think the big thing that I want is a bigger than average blade, a bigger Colorado blade or a bigger willow blade. I truly believe that those big blades in that pre-spawn time frame are one of the things that really helps you to get bigger bites. Now, I'm not saying you can't go out there and catch fish on smaller spinnerbaits or smaller spinnerbait blades. I'm saying if you want to target the biggest fish in your lake, in your body of water that you're fishing, throw those spinnerbaits that have big blades. Now, if it has big blades, there's gonna be more drag in your spinnerbait. You know, those big blades catch a lot more water, whether it's Colorado's definitely catch a lot of water, but even bigger willows will catch a lot of water. So sometimes you have to throw a little bit heavier spinnerbaits than you think. You know, for me, growing up, I used to throw like a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait no matter where I went. And then I started fishing a little bit more half-ounce spinnerbaits. But in the spring, when you're throwing those big blades, a lot of times 3/4 ounce, which is what this is right here, is the smallest that I will go. Because that 3/4 ounce, you really need the weight to kind of help keep that spinnerbait from kind of kicking up on its side. So I really like a 3/4 ounce, sometimes even a 1 ounce spinnerbait. And I know that that sounds really, really heavy, but the more that you do this, the more that you spinnerbait, you will find that there's a lot of fish that are deeper and they are closer to the boat. Like if I'm throwing at the shoreline, those fish are not always right up on the shoreline. They will be, you know, halfway back, and you'll be 30 foot, 40 foot, 50 foot from the bank. There's a lot of fish that kind of stage just off the bank. And so that's the type of fish that I like to catch because they're typically big, and you typically need a little bit bigger spinnerbait, a little bit heavier weighted spinnerbait to kind of get down to where that fish is. So man, a spinnerbait is just, I just love it. I'm so jacked to fish it. Now I do want to talk a little bit about the equipment when it comes to fishing a spinnerbait. I have used a lot of different rods and reels over the years when it comes to spinnerbait fishing, and I have kind of been sold on this particular rod. This is the ARC Cobb Series Buzz Burner rod. So this rod was actually made for a buzzbait very similar to a spinnerbait. This thing has some good tip on it, which really allows you to place that rod or place that bait wherever you want to it. And it also has some decent length. This is a 7 foot 1 inch rod. I use this thing for a lot. I've also used it for jigs and Texas rigs. It's a really good kind of all around rod. And to me, it is the perfect spinnerbait rod. Now, the nice thing for those of you guys that don't know, if you actually use my link down below on ARC's website, you can actually get 10% off all of their products by using the coupon code BFHQ. So just keep that in mind. I'm gonna leave some links down below. Again, use that coupon code over on ARC's website. You will get 10% off a rod. So that makes this rod into a $90 rod, which is a really, really good deal. To me, one of the best deals for the price that you will get with a rod. Now, when it comes to line, I like heavy line with my spinnerbaits. 20-pound fluorocarbon is what I use nearly 100% of the time. I rarely go anywhere up or down. It's usually 20-pound fluorocarbon, which for a lot of guys sounds a little bit heavy, but the thing about that fluorocarbon, it really doesn't impact the way that a spinnerbait kind of goes throughout the water. You know, if you use 20-pound on a crankbait versus 12-pound on a crankbait, it's really gonna kind of make the action of that crankbait a lot more dull. It's not the same with the spinnerbait. The spinnerbait is a completely different animal. And so I like to use heavy pound line. Also, again, if I'm slow rolling this bait, that line is constantly hitting the bottom. If I'm pitching this thing under a dock or next to a laydown, it's constantly up against a lot of heavy cover. And if you set the hook into a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-pound fish and it's in cover or that bait's been on the bottom a lot, you're gonna want 20-pound line. Just trust me on that. You could definitely get away with 15, and you could probably go up to 25, but 20-pound is to me what I use. Now in the pre-spawn, I like a little bit lower gear ratio reels, usually anything in the 6 point, like kind of in that 6.8 to 7.1 to 1 gear ratio. This is a 7.1 that I have on here, and that's what I use a lot in the pre-spawn, because sometimes I have to force myself to fish a little bit slower. I have at times gone down to a really low gear ratio reel. There have been certain times in my life where I've been in maybe a tournament situation where I've been on a very strong, slow rolling a spinnerbait bite. When you do that, The worst thing that you can do is a lot of times use a high-speed reel, because you have to, with a high-speed reel, you really have to go so slow. For me, being a little bit more twitchy at times, it's hard to go that slow. So in order for me to go slow, I go down to a lower gear ratio. I've used a 5.1, like I think it's a 5.6 or 5.4 to 1 gear ratio reel when I'm on a really good slow roll bite. And that just really forces me to fish that spinnerbait slow. But anyways, guys, that is my rod and reel setup for a spinnerbait. I am pumped. You can probably tell. I am pumped for I'm pumped for the new hats, but I'm also just pumped for some spinnerbait fishing to be had here in really about 3 weeks to a month, I'd say. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next one.